Imagine this. You walk into a room full of people, all dressed in the latest, trendiest outfits. You step in, hoping to blend in, feeling confident in your new clothes. But as soon as you enter, you feel the stares. It's like the entire room turns its focus on you. At first, you think nothing of it. But then, you start to hear the whispers, the giggles. The whispers grow louder. The laughter grows bolder. You start to feel the weight of the attention, and suddenly, your stomach twists with a mix of embarrassment and anxiety. You glance down at your clothes, wondering if you made the wrong choice. The mockery is undeniable. What was he thinking with that outfit? Who wears something like that? The very clothes you thought made you look unique, stylish, and different are now the punchline of someone else's joke. The sting of judgment cuts deep. You start to question your taste, your decision-making. But then the twist, what if I told you those clothes weren't just any clothes? What if I told you that the very clothes everyone's mocking, the ones that have become the subject of so much ridicule, were not just something you bought off the rack, but something you created? What if I told you that you are the designer of the entire collection, and the people who are laughing don't even realize they're laughing at the genius behind the designs? This is exactly what happened to Ethan, a 23-year-old aspiring fashion designer fresh out of fashion school, with dreams of changing the industry. Ethan had poured his heart and soul into his work. He wasn't just following trends, he was creating them. Each piece he designed told a story, reflected his unique vision, and represented months of hard work. Yet, when he walked into that room, none of the admiration or respect he deserved came his way. Instead, he was met with mockery. His clothes, his designs, the work of his hands, all dismissed as ridiculous, unfashionable, and out of place. As Ethan stood there feeling the sting of judgment, no one in that room knew the truth. They didn't know that the man they were laughing at was the very one who had crafted the designs they were so quick to ridicule. No one understood that this young man, full of passion and talent, had just designed the very future of fashion. What they saw as a mistake, he saw as an opportunity to break free from the conventional, to challenge the norm, to push the boundaries of what was expected. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the mockery that he was enduring. So, how did Ethan, a young designer mocked for his clothes, turn this moment of ridicule into a victory? How did he go from being the laughingstock of the event to the man who would soon be hailed as a visionary? This is a story about more than just fashion. It's about perseverance, belief in your own vision, and how sometimes the world doesn't recognize greatness until it's too late. This is the story of how Ethan turned mockery into a moment of triumph. Because, after all, the world isn't always kind to the ones who tried to break the mold. It takes time for others to catch up, and for Ethan, this would be the defining moment that would change his life forever. Ethan had always been different. From a young age, he wasn't content with following the trends. While others were buying off the shelves of department stores, he was at home sketching ideas, mixing colors, and experimenting with fabrics. Fashion wasn't just something he liked, it was something he lived and breathed. But becoming a designer wasn't easy. Like many young people, Ethan faced his share of doubts. His family didn't always understand his passion. His friends couldn't see why he spent so much time creating something that seemed so out of reach. Everyone told him to be realistic, to get a normal job, to stop dreaming. But Ethan refused to listen. He decided to pursue his dream of becoming a fashion designer, no matter how many people doubted him. After years of hard work, sacrifice, and learning the ins and outs of the fashion world, Ethan was ready. He had finally completed his first collection, one that was uniquely his own. Every piece was a reflection of his personality, his experiences, and his vision of the future of fashion. Ethan was no longer just a young man with a dream. He was a designer, ready to take on the world. But no one would know that right away. The night of his first big fashion show arrived, and Ethan was both excited and nervous. The lights, the music, the crowd, it was everything he had imagined. As he walked into the venue, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and fear. This was it. This was his moment. But what he didn't know was that the crowd wasn't just there to admire his work. They were waiting to see what would happen next, to see whether this young unknown designer would succeed or fail. Ethan walked through the crowd, his head held high, wearing one of his own designs. It was bold, different, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. But instead of admiration, what he received was laughter. He heard people whispering behind his back, making comments about his clothes. They called them too weird and unfashionable. They even mocked the way he wore his own creations, thinking they were just another attempt at being too edgy. Ethan's heart sank. The laughter felt like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he wondered if all his hard work was for nothing. But he didn't let it show. Instead of backing down, Ethan held his head a little higher. He knew what they didn't. This collection wasn't just clothing. It was a statement. A challenge to the conventional. A bold step into the future. And no matter how many people laughed at him now, he knew that one day they would look back and see what they had missed. As he made his way to the stage, the event continued. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the ridicule. But deep down, he knew this was just part of the journey. Greatness was never recognized immediately. The pioneers were always the ones who faced the hardest resistance. The time had come for the world to see who Ethan really was, not just the young man they were mocking, but the designer who would change the fashion industry forever. But first he had to face the crowd that had already written him off. What they didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. As Ethan made his way through the crowd, he could feel the sharp stares, the sideways glances, and the snickers behind his back. The whispers were constant, cutting through the air like daggers. It wasn't just the usual chatter you'd expect at a fashion event. No, this was something different. It was a mocking laughter, a judgment passed on him and his clothes before anyone even knew who he was. People looked at his outfit, a carefully crafted mix of textures, colors, and patterns, and they didn't see art. They didn't see a reflection of his passion and hard work. What they saw was weird and unfashionable. They didn't understand it, so they mocked it. "Who would wear something like that?" one person whispered to another, pointing at his jacket as if it was a mistake to even have it on. "Looks like something you'd find in a thrift store," another voice chimed in, followed by a loud laugh. Ethan's stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral. He had been through worse. The rejection, the critiques, the countless hours spent perfecting his designs while wondering if anyone would ever see his vision. But standing here, in front of people who were quick to judge and slow to understand, it was hard not to feel like a failure. The harsh words echoed in his ears, louder than the music or the chatter of the rest of the crowd. He could hear them all around him. People making fun of the boldness of his pieces, criticizing his color choices, and suggesting that perhaps he was trying too hard. Some said it looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, others said it was too avant-garde for their taste. The more they spoke, the more Ethan felt small, invisible. It would have been so easy to turn around, take off his jacket, and disappear into the crowd. He could have left convinced that he wasn't meant for this world of high fashion. But then, something clicked inside him. He knew that this moment, no matter how painful, was part of the journey. He remembered the countless nights spent sketching, the frustrations, the doubts, and the voices of people who told him he'd never make it. And yet, here he was. He had designed these clothes for a reason, to push boundaries, to challenge the status quo, and to create something that wasn't just normal or safe. It was his vision, his art, his passion. But the crowd didn't know that yet. They didn't see the work behind the clothes, the effort, the passion, and the creativity that went into every piece. They didn't know that the designer they were mocking was standing right in front of them. They didn't realize that this was the beginning of something huge, something they wouldn't understand until much later. As the laughter continued, Ethan stood tall. He couldn't change their opinions in that moment, but he knew something they didn't, that the people who mocked him would one day look back and wish they'd seen his potential. The fashion world had always been a place for those who dared to be different, but it wasn't always kind to the ones who were ahead of their time. And Ethan was ahead of his time. As he made his way toward the stage, his resolve grew stronger. The ridicule, The mockery, none of it mattered now. He had a bigger purpose. He was about to prove them all wrong. He was about to show the world that being different was not something to be ashamed of. It was something to be celebrated. And in that moment he made a silent promise to himself. No matter how many people laughed at him, no matter how many times he had to endure this kind of ridicule, he would keep pushing forward. Because success wasn't about fitting in with the crowd. It was about standing out, even when the world didn't understand why. As Ethan took the stage, a wave of silence swept over the room. The laughter, the whispers, and the mocking stares all seemed to fade into the background. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. And then the MC's voice cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice boomed, "it is my honor to introduce to you the designer behind tonight's collection. Please welcome Ethan Matthews." The words hung in the air like a sharp breath, and for a split second, the room seemed frozen. Ethan could feel the eyes of the crowd shift from disdain to curiosity. The whispers stopped, replaced by confused murmurs. It took a few seconds before the realization hit them. They weren't just laughing at any ordinary guest. They were laughing at the very person who had designed the collection they had been mocking all evening. The crowd, which had been so quick to criticize, suddenly found themselves stunned into silence. Ethan was no longer just a young man with a strange outfit. He was the creator of the entire collection. The person they had dismissed, ridiculed, and looked down upon was the one who had crafted every stitch, every seam, and every detail they had laughed at. And now they had to face the truth. The person they thought was unimportant was, in fact, the one they should have been admiring. As Ethan stood on the stage, the applause started slowly, almost hesitant at first. Then it grew. A few brave souls clapped, and others followed, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But soon the entire room was erupting in applause. Some were clapping out of respect for the talent they had failed to recognize, while others clapped simply because they didn't want to be left out. But for Ethan, it didn't matter why they clapped. What mattered was that they were finally acknowledging him, even if it came a little too late. It wasn't just the applause that mattered to him, it was the recognition. Ethan had spent countless hours perfecting every design, each one a reflection of his own vision and creativity. The crowd had been blind to it before, but now they had to face the fact that his designs were more than just weird or unfashionable. They were groundbreaking, fresh and bold, everything fashion was supposed to be. Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. The mockery had stung, but now, standing on that stage, he knew that he had proven something important, not just to the crowd, but to himself. He had believed in his vision, even when no one else did. And in that moment, he realized that it wasn't about fitting into the fashion world's narrow definition of style. It was about creating something new, something that would eventually change the game. As the applause continued, Ethan took a deep breath and smiled. He knew this was just the beginning. The world had mocked him, laughed at him, and overlooked him, but now they couldn't ignore him. He was no longer just a young designer in the background. He was a force to be reckoned with, and this was only the start of his journey. The room that had once mocked him was now his stage, and Ethan was ready to show them just how powerful his vision truly was. Ethan's journey to this stage wasn't just about the clothes he designed, or the runway he now stood on. It was a journey filled with struggles, doubts, and endless nights of working alone. Behind the applause and the flashing lights, there was a story of perseverance, a story that few could understand, but many could relate to. Ethan had always known that he was different. While other kids were playing sports or hanging out with friends, he found himself surrounded by fabrics, sketchbooks, and design magazines. His passion for fashion started as a young boy when he watched his mother, a seamstress who ran a small shop, work tirelessly to create beautiful dresses for women in their town. He was fascinated by the way fabric could transform from simple material into something elegant, something powerful. At the age of 14, he started designing his first pieces not for anyone else but for himself. They were simple, basic designs, but they were his own. And as he continued, he realized that he wanted to create things that made people feel confident, bold, and unique, just like he felt when he wore his designs. But the road to success was never smooth. Ethan didn't come from money or connections. His family was supportive, but they didn't understand his passion for fashion. They wanted him to pursue something more practical, maybe become a lawyer or a doctor, like so many others in their community. But Ethan couldn't shake the desire to create, to design. He wanted to leave a mark on the world through fashion, to show people that style could be more than just what was on the surface. His high school years were filled with doubt. While his peers were focused on their future careers and fitting in, Ethan felt like an outsider. He spent hours sketching designs in the back of classrooms, often feeling disconnected from the world around him. At times, he questioned whether he was just chasing a pipe dream. There were moments when he thought about giving up, when the weight of his own insecurities pushed him to the edge. But every time he thought about quitting, he remembered the thrill he felt when he designed something truly unique. He remembered the way he felt when he saw his ideas come to life, even if it was just in his sketches. After high school, Ethan made the difficult decision to go to fashion school, even though it meant taking on a mountain of debt and leaving the safety of his home. The first few years were tough. He faced rejection after rejection, from internships to collaborations. It felt like the industry was telling him over and over again that he wasn't good enough. But instead of giving up, he used each failure as fuel. He spent late nights working on his portfolio, honing his skills, learning from the best, and most importantly, staying true to himself. The designs he created during school were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They were a mixture of classic elegance and futuristic elements, bold choices of colors and materials that others would call risky. But Ethan didn't care about what others thought. He cared about making something that represented who he was and what he believed fashion could be. His professors admired his vision, but his classmates didn't always understand. To them, Ethan's designs were too out there, too unconventional for the fashion industry. And that's when the mocking started. It wasn't just during his school years, it followed him through his career. People told him to tone it down, to make it more wearable, to fit in with the trends that were dominating the industry. They told him his designs were too bold, too avant-garde, too different. But Ethan didn't listen. He couldn't. He had a vision, and no matter how many people told him he was crazy, he refused to abandon it. Finally, after years of pushing through rejection and self-doubt, Ethan put together his first collection. It wasn't easy. He didn't have the connections or the funding that others did. He worked with a small team, most of them fellow students who believed in his vision. The collection was a mix of dramatic silhouettes, intricate patterns, and unexpected fabric choices, everything Ethan had dreamed of. When it was finished, he knew this was the moment he had been working for. He was ready to take his place in the fashion world. But as he stood in front of the crowd that night, in his own designs, the harsh truth became clear. The industry wasn't ready for him. They didn't see the passion and the vision behind his clothes. They didn't see the countless hours he had put into every detail. They saw something different, something that wasn't what they expected, and they mocked it. But Ethan wasn't discouraged. He knew that this was just another step in his journey. The world wasn't ready for his ideas yet, but that didn't mean they wouldn't be one day. The mockery he faced that night was a reminder that true artists don't always get the recognition they deserve immediately. Sometimes, it takes time for people to catch up to what you're doing, and as Ethan looked out over the crowd, he realized that he wasn't in this for the applause or the instant recognition. He was in this for the long haul. He was in this to change the industry, to make people think differently about fashion. And no amount of mockery, no amount of ridicule could ever take that away from him. The applause that followed Ethan's reveal on stage wasn't just for him. It was a complicated mixture of admiration, guilt, and the uncomfortable recognition of the fashion world's hypocrisy. People who had once mocked him now stood in awe, clapping, as if they had understood his genius all along. But Ethan knew better. He wasn't just part of the show anymore, he was part of something bigger, and yet the very industry that had dismissed him so easily now saw his worth, only after the world had caught a glimpse of what they had overlooked. This moment was about more than just personal triumph. It was about the fashion industry itself and the way it operated. Fashion had always been a place where trends ruled, where the safe choices were the most celebrated. The bold, the different, the visionary. They were often ignored, ridiculed, or forced to conform in order to survive. Ethan had stepped out of that mold, defied the conventional, and for a while it seemed like that was enough to make him an outsider. But the very industry that criticized him for his different designs that were too bold, too challenging, was the same one that couldn't fight to take credit for his success once it became undeniable. Ethan was no stranger to the way fashion worked. He knew that the industry was often more about conformity than innovation. The people who ran it, the so-called experts, were so focused on what was popular that they often missed the potential in something new, something daring, and in the process they ignored countless designers like Ethan, waiting in the shadows, crafting ideas that would eventually change the game. Ethan had spent years in the background, watching as trends came and went. The fashion world was a revolving door of people pretending to be revolutionary, constantly recycling old ideas and claiming them as the next big thing. It wasn't about originality, it was about playing it safe. And for someone like Ethan, who had spent his life creating something that was uniquely his own, it felt like a betrayal. The very people who criticized him for thinking outside the box were now clamoring to catch up to his vision. It frustrated him. There was no shortage of talent in the fashion world, but the truth was that the industry often wasn't looking for creativity. It was looking for conformity, for designs that fit the mold, that adhered to a predictable pattern. Ethan's designs had broken that mold, and in doing so, they had made waves, but not in the way he had hoped. The fashion world wasn't ready for someone who didn't fit the established pattern. And yet here they were, applauding him now that he had made it, not because they saw his talent, but because they saw the success he had achieved. The applause was hollow. It wasn't for the hard work he had put in, nor for the originality of his designs. It was for the fact that they now had to admit that Ethan was right. His ideas were innovative, fresh, and exactly what the fashion world needed, but it took the world recognizing his success for them to truly see it. Ethan stood there, in the midst of the applause, with a bittersweet smile. He didn't need the recognition now. What mattered was that he had proven something far more important, that authenticity, originality, and true vision would always find a way to be recognized, even if it took time. The mockery, the rejection, the doubt, it all seemed insignificant now. Ethan wasn't here for the applause. He wasn't here for the approval of the same people who had dismissed him. He was here because he had something important to say, and he had found a way to say it through his designs. And that, he realized, was the true victory. The fashion world's hypocrisy couldn't hold him back any longer. It was time for his voice to be heard, loud and clear. And for the first time, Ethan knew that the world would never again be able to ignore him. As the applause slowly died down, Ethan stood there on that stage, taking in the moment. The room was filled with excitement, but Ethan felt something deeper within himself, a sense of clarity. This moment wasn't just about his designs, or the applause he had earned. It was about something more profound, something that transcended fashion. It was about the power of resilience, the importance of believing in your own vision, and the reminder that success doesn't come to those who follow the crowd. It comes to those who dare to be different, who refuse to give up even when the world doesn't understand their ideas. Ethan knew this moment was bigger than just his personal triumph. He understood the importance of what he had just proven, not only to the crowd that had once mocked him, but to anyone who had ever faced ridicule for being different. His story was a message for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, or that their ideas didn't fit the mold. "You see," he began, his voice calm but filled with conviction, "the clothes you mocked weren't just pieces of fabric stitched together. They were a reflection of my journey. They were my thoughts, my struggles, and my vision for the future of fashion. They represented my belief that fashion can be more than just what we wear, it can be a form of expression, a way to challenge the world around us. The room fell silent once again. Everyone in the audience was listening intently, as Ethan's words sunk in. His message wasn't just about fashion, it was about the courage to be yourself, to stay true to your vision, even when the world doesn't immediately recognize it. People will always judge you based on appearances. They will mock what they don't understand, Ethan continued, but that doesn't mean you should change who you are to fit their expectations. If you believe in something, if you believe in your ideas, you have to keep pushing forward. Success isn't about fitting into the world, it's about creating a space for yourself, a space where your voice can be heard. The crowd, which had once laughed at him, was now hanging out every word. They had seen the clothes, mocked them, and yet here was the designer speaking the truth, not just about his designs, but about the challenges that all creators face when they refuse to conform. Ethan wasn't just a fashion designer now. He was a voice for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And in that moment, the crowd saw him not just as a designer, but as a symbol of perseverance and individuality. Ethan paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence in the room was palpable. For the first time, people weren't judging him for his clothes. They were listening to what he had to say. They were understanding the deeper message behind his designs, that fashion wasn't just about what was worn, it was about what was said. Tonight isn't just about this collection, Ethan said, his voice growing stronger. It's about what we can all achieve if we stay true to ourselves, no matter how many people laugh at us, no matter how many times we're told that we're not good enough. I'm here to prove that success doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from standing out. The applause that followed wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine. Ethan's words had hit home. People in the audience, the ones who had once mocked him, now stood up, not out of obligation, but because they understood something deeper. Ethan had just delivered a powerful message, one that went beyond fashion and spoke to the heart of every creator, every dreamer, and every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Ethan smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. He had done it. He had proven that his vision was not just worth acknowledging, it was worth celebrating. And as the applause continued, he knew that this was just the beginning. The world hadn't seen all he had to offer yet. He had much more to say, much more to create. And now, the world was ready to listen. The mockery had been a part of his journey, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where Ethan would continue to challenge the fashion world, push boundaries, and inspire others to believe in their own vision. And in that moment he realized that true success wasn't about the approval of others. It was about believing in yourself, no matter what. As the final applause echoed through the room, Ethan took a deep breath, letting the magnitude of the moment sink in. His journey had been long, filled with struggles, failures, and moments of doubt. But as he stood there, surrounded by the very people who had once ridiculed him, he realized something important. None of the mockery, the rejection, or the pain had been in vain. They had all been stepping stones on his path to this point, the moment where his vision had finally been recognized. Ethan had learned that success was never immediate. The world didn't always appreciate innovation when it first appeared. Sometimes it took time for people to see the bigger picture. Fashion, like any other art form, was about pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo, and making people think. And while it was painful to be dismissed, he had never stopped believing in the power of his ideas. Looking out into the crowd, Ethan saw not just admiration but a deeper understanding. They weren't clapping because they now realized his clothes were beautiful. They were clapping because they understood the bigger message, the power of resilience, the importance of following your passion, and the courage to stay true to yourself, even when the world doesn't understand your vision. He had shown them that fashion was more than just trends. It was about self-expression, identity, and change. It was about taking risks and daring to be different. Ethan had always believed that the true essence of fashion wasn't found in the clothes themselves but in the stories they told. His designs were a reflection of his journey, And now they had become a reflection of everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood. As the crowd slowly began to file out, Ethan stood there for a moment longer, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. This wasn't the end of his story, it was just the beginning. He had proven that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to be celebrated, and no matter how much the fashion world had tried to box him in, he had carved out a space for himself, a space where his voice would be heard. This was more than just a fashion show. It was a statement. And Ethan knew that, from this moment forward, the world would never see him the same way again. As he walked off the stage, he couldn't help but smile. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt certain about one thing. The world was ready for what he had to offer. And no matter how many times he faced mockery or rejection, he would always find a way to push forward, to create, and to inspire others to do the same. Because true success didn't come from fitting in. It came from standing out. And Ethan had done just that. The applause faded away, but the impact of that night would echo through the fashion world for years to come. As the event came to a close, Ethan stepped backstage, his heart still racing. The adrenaline, the excitement, and the weight of everything he had just experienced were overwhelming. But in the midst of it all, a small smile played on his lips. He had made it. He had proven his point to the world, to the doubters, and most importantly, to himself. But his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ethan's story was more than just about one collection or one fashion show. It was a reminder to anyone who had ever been told they were too different, too bold, or too out there to stop. The fashion world had ridiculed him, but now they couldn't ignore him. He had found his voice and used it to change the conversation. He had shown that no matter how many times you're knocked down, you can always rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. Ethan wanted his journey to inspire others, to remind them that their ideas mattered, their vision was important, and that the road to success wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. For anyone out there with a dream, with something they truly believed in, Ethan had one simple message: don't let the world tell you who you are or what you can do. Keep going. Keep pushing. Keep believing in yourself, because the world may not see your potential at first, but one day they'll see it. And when they do, they won't be able to look away. As he took one last glance at the empty room, the echo of the applause still ringing in his ears, he thought about everything he had gone through to get here. The ridicule, the rejection, the endless nights of hard work, it had all led to this moment. And though the applause would eventually fade, the impact of his message would last far longer. For those watching at home, for the dreamers and the creators who are still fighting for their place in the world, Ethan's story was just one of many. His journey was a reminder that we are all capable of breaking the mold, challenging expectations, and creating something truly original. All it takes is the courage to be different and the persistence to push through the doubts. So if you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like your ideas were too big or too bold for the world to understand, Ethan's story is for you. You're not alone. And no matter how many times you're told you can't do something, always remember, sometimes the world just needs a little more time to catch up with you. If you've been inspired by Ethan's journey, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let them know that their vision matters, and they can achieve greatness if they stay true to themselves. And if you're ready to take that first step, whether in fashion or any other field, don't wait for permission. Start today. Create, design, build, and when the world finally catches up, they'll know who you are. Believe in yourself. Keep pushing. Stand out. Because the world needs more people like Ethan. People who refuse to be ordinary and dare to change the world, one bold idea at a time. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire you to be your true self. And remember, the world may not always see your worth right away, but with determination, resilience, and belief in your vision, you'll always find a way to make them see it.